Hello, and welcome back to the TCL podcast. And this is where we talk murder and other forms of crime. I do have a YouTube channel that you can go and check out. I also have a Patreon that you can join as well. By joining, you will receive early access to my scheduled episodes that are set to come out. I also have merch shop that you can go and buy something from. For any updates on my channel and podcast, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Now, with all that out of the way, let's dive into today's episode here on the TCL podcast. Today, we are doing a TCL special, which will be on my channel and my podcast. If you recall, I did a mini series called "I Survived," in which I focused on the survivors of kidnapping cases, and where I talked about their victimology. Today, I'm going to talk about the perp in one of those cases. This case I am referring to was Kara Robertson and her perp on the topic today. Today, we are going to be talking about the case of Richard Mark Evonitz. And if you want to, you can go back and watch our episode and listen to it. Yes, if you want to, I'm not going to make you. So, Evonitz was a serial killer, and he had 3+ victims from 1996 to 2002, and his victimology included girls and young women, and his methodology was strangulation. His crimes occurred in Virginia, South Carolina, California, and Florida, and he was surrounded by police when he shot and killed himself on June 22nd, 2002. He was responsible for the death of 3 girls in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, and the abduction of a 15-year-old girl in Richland County, South Carolina. I think we all know which one that is. And Evonitz had been suspected in other murders and confessed to a number of crimes to his sister before committing suicide. So Richard Mark Edward Evonitz was born July 29, 1963, at Providence Hospital in Columbia, South Carolina, and to Joseph Evonitz and Tess Reagan Evonitz, and he was the first of 3 children, 2 daughters, Kristen and Jennifer. Followed him in 1968 and 1971. Known as Mark to avoid the confusion with his paternal uncle, whose name was Richard, he graduated from Alamo High School in 1980 at the age of 16, so he was a bright kid. So after high school, he worked briefly as a manager on the Jiffy Lube before joining the United States Army. Well, Navy, my bad. He served as a sonar technician, receiving a Good Conduct Medal before being honorably discharged for 8 years of service. Following his stint in the Navy, same thing. Evonitz worked steadily at businesses and sold compressors and grinding equipment. He filed for bankruptcy in 1997 due to being unable to keep up with the bills after filing a divorce. And his house foreclosed on him in 1999 following a failed business venture. But at the time of his death, had been working in an air compressor company since moving to South Carolina a few years earlier. In July 1987, he exposed himself and masturbated in front of a 15-year-old girl in Orange Park, Florida, and he was arrested a month later, and when his ship returned to the port, pleaded no contest, and was sentenced to 3 years probation. He is also suspected of a 1994 abduction and rape of a 1995 rape of Massaponax, Virginia. On September 9, 1996, he abducted 16-year-old Sophia Silva from her front yard near Lorella Park in Spotsylvania. Her body was found a month later in a creek bed off Road 3 in King George County. Sisters Kristen and Katie Lisk, aged 15 and 12, were abducted from their front yard in Spotsylvania County on May 1st, 1997. Their bodies were found later in the South Anna River near Old Ridge Road in Hanover County. On June 24th, 2002, Evonitz abducted a 15-year-old girl from her friend's yard in Columbia, South Carolina. This is where the Carrie Robinson case comes in. But we're not talking about that one in full detail. That's just some of them. So, and there goes my mic. And so he took her to his apartment, raped her, and tied her to his bed. While he slept at night, the victim was able to free herself, escape, and was able to identify the attacker to the police. He pled at he pled after finding her gone, and she ended up surrounding. She ended up, and he ended up being surrounded by police in Sarasota, Florida. On June 22nd, 2002, he was surrounded by police near the waterfront of Sarasota, Florida. He was urged to surrender peacefully, but kept a pistol in his hand until a police dog was released. After being bitten multiple times, Evans shot himself, and he was declared dead at 10:52 p.m. Following the return of the body to the family, his remains were cremated and scattered over the Saluda River. The horrors of his abduction and murder introduced themselves to the residents of Spotsylvania County on September 9, 1996. And this was with 16-year-old Sophia Silver, when she was last seen doing homework on her front steps of her family's county home, shortly after arriving home from school. Silver was taken quietly and without apparent struggle. In fact, her older sister inside the home during the adoption, but was completely unaware of her sibling's situation. Despite the police's best efforts, Silver seemed to vanish into thin air, and eventually was found dead in a marsh 6 weeks later, and 20 miles away. She was wrapped in a white cover, and her public hair had been shaved off. Police were at a loss in the Silver case with the sisters, and with the Silver case when two sisters, Kristen Lisk and Katie, who were both 15 and 12, disappeared. After getting off their respective school buses May 1st, 1997, in Fredericksburg, their body came from some time later to find no sign of his daughters except for Kristen's book bag saying discarded in the front yard, and the two sisters were found dead 5 days later, about 40 miles from their home. Like Silver, their killer had shaved their public areas at some point during their forced confinement. It was obvious that the two cases were related, and all three girls had been abducted at their home after school without any struggle. All had public hair shaved off by a killer, all had strangulation and suffocated, and all were dumped in the water. And it came as no surprise when the DNA samples from both crimes matched. It also brought authorities closer to solving the mystery. And after a few years, it seemed likely that the Spotsylvania killer would never be caught. Fate eventually stepped in, though, when a 39-year-old man named Richard Evonitz abducted a 15-year-old girl on June 24th, 2002 in Columbia, and after raping his captive holding her hostage in his apartment for 18 hours, he got sloppy and dozed off, allowing her to work herself free and escape. And police responded to the report found in her apartment, but Evans was eventually tracked down in Sarasota 2 days later and shot himself in the head before he could be arrested. It was apparent um, during a search of the deceased abductor's apartment that he was no first time offender. A footlocker was opened and found to contain seemed to be what items of his trophies. And among the things were newspaper articles around the Lisk Silva murders, and it was soon discovered that Evonitz lived in the area of the abductions. At the time, he had a criminal record from an earlier arrest for masturbating in public in the presence of a young and likely horrified girl. It took until late August a forensic test to confirm the obvious. The evidence had stalked and murdered Silva and the Lisk sisters. Fibers from items in Evans' apartment matched many of those found on these girls' bodies. And Kristen Lisk's handprint was lifted on the inside of his trunk, and DNA samples were matched, and the residents of rural Spotsylvania County could at least rest easy knowing that the Phantom Killer would never strike again. Authorities suspect that killed he killed since the murders of the Lisk sisters and believe he may be responsible for the unsolved slayings of Alicia Reynolds in Culpeper, Virginia, in 1996. And his written directions that seemed to lead to Reynolds' dump site were found in the footlocker, and Evans had lived in Virginia, South Carolina, California, and Florida. Not to mention that he had many travels during an 8-year enlistment in the Navy. He also was suspected of many rapes, including one that occurred in Spotsylvania in the mid 90s. The heroic South Carolina girl who escaped from his clutches and put police on his tail had become very deserving recipient of $150,000 reward for helping solve the Lisk and Silver murders. Richard forever changed the way area residents viewed the community. After his crimes, Fredericksburg never seemed as safe. In September 1996, but the murders will remain unsolved until 2002, and this was when the Kerry Robinson case would come into play. So, this is a bit of a warning, it's going to go into a bit of his past. Let's go into that. But it's going to be some triggering, so just a heads up. Um, his sexual obsessions are key to understanding him, and these are recounted here in the details that a lot can be found disturbing. Um, for the families involved and for many in the community to review these cases and wonder it will be painful, but perhaps the pain will be bearable if the newly revealed facts help us understand the man capable of performing these deeds. So, John Douglas is a best-selling author and former FBI profiler. He has written about serial and has written about how serial killers are made, not born. If so, then was made in Colombia. He was born in South Carolina, capital in South Carolina in July 1963. He was the first child to Joseph and Tess Evonitz, and the couple would have two daughters, Kristen and Jennifer. However, his home was not a happy one growing up, and his parents separated when he was a baby and he was 12, with Joseph and Tess finally divorcing in 1985, and both saying now it might be even better for everyone if they had divorced sooner. Joseph Evans, originally from New Jersey, where his father left his mother when Joseph was a child, was stationed at Fort Jackson and just outside Columbia when he met Tess, who worked at an army base. Joseph worked as a draftman for a sign company and later a taxi driver. He also drank heavily, and Tess remembers that he would get drunk and pass out. And she would even go and say when he got up, he was even worse. Joseph, who was, who's in his 60s now, lives in Arlington with his second wife and remembers it differently. He said that he would drink on weekends, but he did not pass out and he was never an alcoholic. He said that he has stopped drinking. Interesting. And he didn't make and he will also go on and say, I don't make any excuses. That's just no way excuses for what happened to those four girls. Joseph admits that he belittled his family, calling them morons and peons. Mark bore Mark bore his share of that abuse. So Joseph Evans would also go on to say that I've had some psychological problems myself, and which is that the drinking was about. So, two incidents involving both father and son have intrigued police that may shed a light into puzzling aspect of his crimes. His fascination with water, and one incident where a family member said that Joseph drowned Mark's dog in front of him. That makes me sad. It's sick. Because, look, okay, it's when the animals and the children are involved. Always. So, and Joseph said this was not true. He says his children were always adopting strays, and he didn't take one to the pound. Mark also told family members that Joseph tried to drown him when he was sick. 6. And family members differ on the way the incident played out. Some say that Joseph tried to drown his son in a waddling pool after the boy splashed water on the hamburgers during the cookout. Others say it happened in a hot tub. Joseph described it as a minor incident that his son misinterpreted. Honestly, it's hard to tell who to believe on this one. These guys are both messed up in the head. Um, but once he would also go on to say that one time when Mark was little, I gave him a bath. He kept yelling the water going to his eyes, so I took a bunch of water and dumped it over his head. He was he was so frightened that, and Joseph said he wishes he had never done it. So investigators will point to these incidents when trying to understand why behind his murders. I want to know the why. That's why I love. Look, I love true crime. I love the psyche behind why serial killers do what they do. Evidence had also hid Sophia's body underwater in the swamp in King George County, as police learned that from Kara that he made her take a bath during her night of confinement. Were those crimes were inspired by his past? Was he seeking attention? Police have been asking these questions for nearly 2 years. But there were no answers. His widow, Hope, said her husband and the nightmares had nightmares about his father. They were starting to crop up more and more. And and her Tess said her son came to her a few weeks before his death, and he was crying that he wanted to talk about the violence and abuse that he suffered at his father's hand. And she would say, I don't want to hear it, it's too painful. Yeah. Oh. So Richard would have two young wives. And studies showed, and those who have studied him have always been intrigued by this. They believe that his marriages offer another viewpoint of the turmoil that lived inside him. He married two women who were much younger than he was. Both were dependent, compliant, and naive. Both women, he said, there was first love. In evidence, married his first wife, the former Bunny Lou Gower, who when he was 25 in the Navy. She was 17, and Bonnie had seen his neighbor in South Carolina and a friend for his sister and a friend of his sister's. And he had known her since she was in their sixth grade, and she had a crush on him. Tess remembers a family picture of the kids dancing in the living room when Bonnie was still in middle school, and in the picture of his arms touching Mark's arms, and Bonnie wanted the picture to remember Mark by. And soon there would be wedding pictures. Bonnie and Richard would marry in Columbia in 1988, and the couple lived in California and Maine when he was in the Navy. They moved to Fredericksburg in 1993, and after his discharge, the couple chose Fredericksburg because his family lived there, and also because Virginia said it was the honor of Bonnie's California cosmetology license. South Carolina would not. So the Evonitz were moved to Stafford County, where Mark's uncle Richard Evonitz lived. And later, they lived in an apartment in Spotsylvania and Fredericksburg. In 1996, they would pay $125,000 for a new home in South Oaks Division. Pretty sure that's a steal compared to today. Seriously, have you looked at interest rates? It's ridiculous. Anyway, 5 months later, Bonnie was preparing to leave her husband. She had met a man from California on the internet, and she told him that she wanted to move there. Her mother and brother also lived in California, and Bonnie visited California in early September 1996. She returned a week later to begin packing her stuff. This would leave Richard devastated, as he was, and even sent him in a depressive state. So investigators who have interviewed Bonnie would note that she eventually realized that her husband was not like other men, and so he like so and evidence abducted Sophia while Bonnie was on vacation in California. He abducted the List sisters after the couple separated before he met Hope Marie Crowley, a Caroline County resident, and a woman who would also be his second wife. He met Hope in 1991, and when she was 17, he was 36. That's just sick to begin with. And they they met when she waited on him at Aunt Sarah's pancake house in Massaponax, and his family and sister with evidence that her family, when Mark flirted with Hope, and the sisters encouraged her to go out with him. Seriously, he's twice her age for crying out loud. Like, come on now. So when Hope turned 18, she moved out of her parents' home and lived in her first King George County, and she later moved in with Evidence, and they married in 1999. She will go on to say that we just clicked. Some investigators believe that Evidence' choices of wives and his relationship may explain his periods in life where he apparently committed no crimes. And police were puzzled by these periods. From 1987 to 1996, and from 1997 to 2002, he usually a predator as dangerous as he was, does not have the quiet periods. And however, during these periods, he may not have found what he wanted at home. His wives may have satisfied his fantasies. He said he and his wives shared other private parts, um, and they also played games with him when he bound them and played his daddy role. That's sick right there. They said that with Hope, he asked her to dress up like a young girl, and then he would actually force his way into their apartment and act like he was raping her. And Hope doesn't see her intimate relationship with her husband as outside the norm, though she admits that she was young and inexperienced. So, according to the police's theory, as Evidence Rives grew older and more womanly, he became restless. His wives told police that he wanted them to look younger and dress younger. He also told them that he no longer felt them attractive, and he became less interested in them, and he grew more dangerous. So, sounds to me like he was a predator who preyed on young women who was also a narcissist at the same time. So there were problems at home for him. So, his relationships with his wives were complicated, as his relationships with his family. And investigators have discovered that the former Boy Scout and Little Leaguer began drinking and smoking at 12 and using marijuana at 13. He was brilliant, said his father, and he had problems at home and a reputation for a bad temper. Soon he was violating his curfew and breaking into a neighbor's home. And all of this had occurred when the household was sexually charged. His mother and father had affairs, and the children were aware of. And at one point, Joseph enlisted his son to deliver messages to a neighbor with whom he was having an affair with. So later, after a divorce from Joseph, Tess began a relationship with Perry DeVoe, and DeVoe was in a South Carolina prison at the time, convicted of murder and rape. And Tess married DeVoe in prison and divorced him 12 years later. He is still incarcerated. And after graduation from Armo High School in 1980, he became a manager at Jiffy Lube and he was 17. And he did not like the people his son, Joseph did not like the people his son was hanging out with, calling them the four criminals. So one day, the older Evonitz drove by the Jiffy Lube in the middle of the day and found it closed, and Mark Evonitz had shut the store with his friends. Later, later, Evonitz and one of his friends had wrote bad checks for $350 at a local Kmart. Evonitz's career as a sonar technician did what his family hoped for. He emerged after 9 years and worked in discipline. He became a family man with a good job who played the guitar and enjoyed raising a gray cheek parakeet named Clyde. Evonitz's employer, when he lived in Spotsylvania, said that he watched a video made by Walter Grinders. Evonitz told his father that a cab driver sorry, I got sidetracked for a second, and he figured his son would relent. So Evonitz was much closer to his mom and sisters. When he and his would-be wife Hope moved to Virginia, and from Virginia to Columbia in 1999, they lived with his sister, Kristen, who were married in her home. And later, his employer from South Carolina transferred him to the Spartanburg office, and his mother urged him to move there to avoid the 90-minute commute. So, and Tess's devotion was apparent on the day Kara fled. When Wayward called her at Disney World in Florida, she would go on to say that Mark's all over the news. Police are looking for him. He kidnapped a girl at gunpoint and held her in his apartment. Tess would say, "That's ridiculous. Why are you saying this to me? That can't be true." So, and Kristen would keep repeating this 3 times before Tess herself had shown her loyalty over the years when she met her brother in Orangeburg as he fled from the police. The next day, one of Mark's relatives called him from the police station in Columbia to warn him that the police were coming to Orangeburg to arrest him. Um, his widow, Hope, refused to believe him and she blamed Kira for what happened, even if Mark did it. However, it doesn't matter to her, she still loved him. Tess said that she recognized a sense of inadequacy in her son, a feeling of inferiority, despite the bragging of all he has done. And he was a success for his work, and Evonitz considered himself a failure, his mom said. The assaults by his father would have taken a toll. His failures seemed to multiply in 1996 and 1997. Bonnie had met a man in California and was visiting there. So it sounds like to me, no matter how many mistakes this man makes, that his mom's always just gonna be trying to just gonna be there to give him excuse after excuse. Sorry, y'all. I'm trying to find my fan. The plug-in for my fan. There we go. Anyway, that was a workout right there. Anyway, his final victim, who escaped the 18-hour nightmare with one ambition to see her captured in the courtroom, would say, I wanted to go to trial and let him see me again and know I was his downfall. So Kira would go on to say. And the teenager would reveal new details about her ordeal in the media interview. She would say that he put me in a plastic container in the back seat and stopped after 10 or 15 minutes, put handcuffs on me. Like, I did a whole episode on this case, which y'all can gladly go back and watch. But that is it for today's episode. I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a great day.